I wanted to thank you for joining us for this session. This is our first Maven Lightning session where we're having an opportunity to talk about connection councils. My name is Christine Perfetti, and I am a product advisor as well as the founder of Lift Up Connections, which is an organization whose charter is to lift up women, specifically women mid-career to late career, to figure out what's next. And our goal from today, hi, Diana. Hi, Mary. Thank you for joining.
Hello.
I appreciate you coming on. The goal for today, as you both know, and I'd love to share with attendees, is to give a little bit of a perspective on how we were spending our spring and part of summer going through the Connection Council. I invited both of you on, and part of the reason was you were part of the pilot program for our councils. So the goal of this session was just to give people an overview of what the councils were, but really, it's a research session for me as well, as we're sharing with attendees what we learned. I went through the council with both of you, but I haven't heard in depth what your perspective and experience was. So I'd love to delve into that if that works for you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so to start, quick introductions. Diana DeMarco Brown. Hi, Diana. Diana and I have known each other for 20 years, about 20 years, but we've, I'd say in the past 6 months, gotten to know each other a whole lot better. And we'll talk about that. For those of you who haven't had a chance to hear Diana speak or teach, she is brilliant. She's a UX and design pioneer. She's been in the design and user experience space for over 2 decades, and she's a leader I turn to for advice and feedback on how to deliver best-in-class products. So Diana, thanks for joining.
Very good to say hello.
Of course. And Mary, we've known each other now close to 2 years. Time is flying. Mary and I met. Mary is many things in terms of talent and brilliance, but we met. Mary is a campaign strategist, so she works with candidates to help boost their profile and in many cases help them win. And Mary is based right now in Indiana, but in addition to her work as a campaign strategist, she's also an amazing marketing leader and marketing strategist. We connected through your campaign work, but since then we've talked about many topics in terms of promoting women, promoting businesses, and I'm thrilled you're on today. So thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so why are we here today? I mentioned we wanted to talk about connection councils and the value, and also from your perspective, you were part of the pilot. But before we go into what you thought of it, I'd love to give a brief overview of what these connection councils were and why are they called connection councils. So the history, around March, April, early spring, we ran the first pilot of a connection council. My background is in product research and product visioning. So I've spent the majority of my career helping organizations map out a long-term vision for their products based on insights. The past year, I was hearing from a bunch of women, many of these women mid-career, they describe it as mid-career or late career, hearing about the visioning work, but also talking with me and saying, you know what, I'm trying to figure out what's next. So the idea in the early spring was, how do we take these visioning techniques and methods, but bring it to a new audience? So not planning out a long-term vision for your product. Instead, if you're mid-career or late career and trying to figure out what's next in career and life, how do we apply these visioning techniques to help women decide what's next? So that was the plan and objective from the first council, the pilot we ran. And the way it worked, Mary and Diana were part of this group. We also had 3 other women, so it's 6 total women in a group cohort for 8 weeks. A little teaser we'll talk about. It's continued on beyond the 8 weeks, but the intention for the pilot was an 8-week program, where the end goal for the program was to help all of these women and guide them through a visioning process and design thinking process to map out what the next stage of their career would be. So through that 8 weeks, we went through some exercises and methods, based on design thinking and visioning work. So the way it worked, the first couple of weeks, we mapped out what our objectives were, what areas of our life did we want to address. So some of the women in the group wanted to think about their next job stage. Others were thinking about how do they improve their health during this midlife stage. There were other women who were talking about, I'd like to find more fun in my life. So the starting point was identifying what we wanted to achieve from the 8 weeks and where we wanted to transition and what our focus was. So we started there. And then we moved on to talk a bit more about figuring out what has our past experience been and current experience, and what about our experiences to date have worked well for us? What were our strengths? Where were areas that we wanted to cultivate more? We went through some exercises to figure out our life up to that point. And then I'd say, I thought this would be the magic. We'll talk a little bit more about this. Then each of the ladies went through a visioning exercise to start mapping out what their long-term life and career vision would be. And we shared that with each other, very much like what you'd see in a design thinking, design ideation workshop. We went through that process. And by the end, I'll ask you, Diana and Mary, where you think we got to. I'd say the pilot council members really got to the point where their thinking had shifted in terms of where they may go next. So that was, in a nutshell, the 8-week process at a very high level. Diana, when I reached out to you and we were talking about doing these councils, what were your expectations? What were you hoping to get? And can you tell me a little bit about what you were thinking, if anything, about expectations?
Yeah, just for context, for me, I was at multiple inflection points, right? The universe loves coincidence. I had been laid off about a year prior. I had gotten divorced 2 years prior. It's a little bit nebulous. My daughter is wrapping up high school, and so about to be an empty nester, but also just navigating the different parenting that comes with teenager, and really just all the life things, parents requiring parenting, just a lot going on. And also really feeling like it was a good time, given that I was laid off from my last startup, to really rethink. My initial instinct was to just keep going, but I put a pause on it. I slammed the brakes on that a little bit and tried to take the summer, and then found myself going back for more of the same. And the job search wasn't really going well. The market's not great, but also my head wasn't in the right place. Yeah, so I don't know that I had any expectations other than that I could use a little space and accountability to work on framing those things and thinking about what was next. Not that I hadn't, because I had done that exercise of sitting down and thinking what was next when I first got laid off, but it didn't feel like I was making traction on anything. And so it felt like I could get a little more clarity. And I had no expectations. I was like, we'll see what happens.
And I didn't mention to the group too, that in terms of format, one of our goals for this session is to share with other women and other people how you might run these councils on your own and how we structured it and where the magic came from. When I first came to you, Diana and Mary, I said 8 weeks. Let's meet every other week. Again, as you said, no major expectations except to start getting a bit more clarity on what the next steps were. So it was an 8-week program where we met every other week for 90 minutes. And I shared the teaser. We went for the 8 weeks. We're still going. And it's been because we're getting a lot out of it. But the initial plan was 8-week cohort that by the end, we'll have some clarity on next steps. So that's where we landed. In terms of format, we can talk about the exercises in a bit. I'd like to hear from you, Mary, first. But the reason I'm so excited to share this from my perspective is that many of the people I've talked with about the council come from a design, product, UX background. That's been my life, and that's where I have a lot of colleagues. None of the people I've talked to have been surprised that if you use visioning approaches or design thinking methods, that all of the women would land in a really nice, positive place. But what really surprised me is after the 8-week sessions, the degree of connection and friendship and support. I just was honestly flabbergasted by the level of authenticity and intimacy in the conversation. So that's what I'll ask you about as well. But it was 8 weeks where we got to something pretty nice and magical from my perspective. Mary, turning to you, we knew each other. We had worked together a little bit. We had not sat down and talked about any of our authentic, deep feelings yet. But I'm wondering, what were your expectations coming into this group? And Diana, was it let's see what happened, or where were you at?
Yeah, so really good questions. A little background about myself. Christine mentioned that I'm here in Indiana. I moved here from Boston, so that was a big life change for me. I had never moved out of New England, and my husband and I relocated here. And within 4 months, I was like, the job that I was at, I transitioned to another job. COVID was coming, so that got paused for 6 weeks, like many people. And fast forward, I started volunteering in the political space. And then I realized my skill set was really tied to that and I wanted to make the leap. So I made the leap. So I'm going on 5 years now in that space. And what I realized coming here to Boston, because of COVID, had an impact on it. I'm a connection person. I thrive on working around with others. And that was a missing component in my life because we all were remote. I was making great new relationships. But I also, when I started exploring what I could possibly do in terms of networking in this area, while I did meet really nice people and I continue to do that in this work, there was nothing out there for folks of my age. It was all young women or young folks launching. I'm like, I launched. This is not who I am. This is not it. Big void, because life is different at every 10 years. We're at different pivotal points. And I was getting a little frustrated and I felt a void. Full just transparency. I felt a void that needed to be filled. So I didn't have any expectations, but I know I wanted more of something. Wasn't sure what that something was going to be or how it was going to play out. So I was very open. I will add, I could talk about this more later, but I come from my previous work experience, 9+ years, 8+ years working in Lululemon. And that was all about connection and value. And so I really got a lot out of that, the visioning. And I noticed for 4 or 5 years that was missing. So I really was in search of it. So I had an open possibility. What is this going to be? Not sure. Wanted to connect more with like-minded women. I trusted Christine. So I was like, okay, we need to take a break from our computers. Let's connect. And I jumped in and kept it as living in possibility, as I like to say a lot.
Mhm, mhm. Thanks, Mary. I was curious in terms of giving people even more insight into how we ran this. We did keep it, when we started the session, I mentioned to all of the ladies in the group that this was a pilot. So we would be co-creating and designing this program together. So we were all iterating on the program. I would put together an agenda every week. It was hard for me sometimes to let go of the agenda, but that's where the magic was happening. And for those of you who are attending today, one of my big takeaways was that while it was very important for all of us to think through what our next act was and designing the next chapter, one of the big benefits, and I mentioned I was surprised by this, was the level of support that developed by having a group of like-minded women at similar stages, not similar careers necessarily. We're in different professions, many of us, but we were at a similar stage where we were navigating these inflection points and pivots. We also were in a similar stage of age, not all exactly the same age, but I think it's fair to say we could describe it as a midlife stage to some capacity. As you said, Mary, you're not just launching now, we're launched and we were figuring out what's next. And in terms of the way we structured it, where I mentioned that we were trying to take visioning techniques and design thinking techniques from the product world, it was much more relaxed than a typical product visioning session, which is time boxed and keeping everyone on target, where the way we structured it, the first meeting, I knew all of the women in the pilot, but not all of the women knew each other. So the first 90-minute meeting, it was a lot of just meeting each other, having introductions. And the one other piece from that first meeting was setting some intentions for the program. What would you like to accomplish? But I'm curious for you, Diana, and you, Mary, when we went into this, you were starting out not knowing everyone in the group. Mary, you mentioned this element of trust. You knew me, but can you talk to that element of connection that grew over time and what your perspective was on that as we went through the 8 weeks?
Do you want me to go first?
Either one. Yeah.
going back to what you said, yes, I knew you. I knew Stephanie in the group. And what I think was enabled us to get connected and start trusting each other on a different level than any other group that I've been part of is we were all open to it. And that created organically a safe space for us to share because we were all open to it. And we all also intuitively knew that there was something missing and we wanted to fill a void. So I think with those two things of knowing we wanted more, whatever that more was, and knowing that in order for us to get out of something, which we all know, you've got to put a little in. So we were willing to put ourselves out there in a way that you created the safe space, enabled us to do that. And it developed each week. I'm sure Diane can attest. It got a little deeper each week because as you build that trust and you build that camaraderie and you build that understanding, and I think we were able to go deeper because of the ability amongst ourselves to get to know each other. So once you start, I think there's always that in work environments, how much do I share of my personal life? Should they know about that? Will I get judged for this? When you're having an issue and you really want to talk about what's at the core of a work issue, you might not feel safe talking to your work colleagues because you might get judged. But this was allowed us to get to that connection point that allowed us to go to the next level because we weren't work colleagues. That was taken away. And at the same time, we got to know each other. So when you get to know each other, you can ask deeper questions. So it was coming with that expectation of I put out what I get back. So we all put out and we got a lot back.
Diana, what are your thoughts in terms of, we'll delve more into for attendees what the agendas were like, but I'd have to say out of the 90-minute sessions, about 60 minutes, probably even more, were us talking to each other and telling each other what was going on in our lives that week and asking for advice. I'm curious, what was your perspective?
Yeah, I think that the fact that everyone came in completely candid and completely open and really sped along the process, I do credit, as Mary does, you creating that safe space. I also think there was something, several people had pre-existing relationships. I didn't know Kyle that well, and frankly, we didn't know each other that well, but we also had the shorthand of having our careers in common, right? Like we all came from the same space. So in talking about my work and the possibility, I knew there were people who would understand what I was talking about in the room, as well as people with a fresh perspective. And I think that I really liked that the flexibility of the format. You would seat it, but it was like, if you didn't have a chance to do the whole reading or to do the whole exercise or to do whatever, you could still show up and get value because the conversation was the important piece, right? Yes, we spent a lot of time at the beginning just checking in, but when we did shift to the agenda, the people who had done work ahead came in primed, but everybody could still get value out of the conversation and the thinking and the discussion because it was happening in the room. Like we were talking about what it meant to us and we were reacting and responding. And so I like that flexibility because meeting once every 2 weeks was a great rhythm. There's weeks where things explode or you have a family event. And so there were some weeks where it wasn't possible to do the reading, but you didn't feel, oh, I'm not going to get anything out of it. It's not like book club, right? So you could still show up and get something out of it, even if you didn't get a chance to. And I think that flexibility, but still getting value, even with that, was great.
Diana, thank you. You spoke to the reading, and to give a little context and background, I started out mentioning a few of us came from a UX product background and have run visioning and design ideation workshops. At least half of the group, that was not a new approach and method, but we did take inspiration from books and readings to think through how did we want to structure each of the 8 weeks. And I'll need some reminders from both of you because, as we mentioned, this was co-created. So when we started the program, I started out with a few resources that are excellent resources. One was professors from Stanford University wrote the excellent book, Designing Your Life. So we took some thoughts and ideas and inspiration from that. I love Martha Beck's book, Finding Your North Star. Absolutely excellent book in terms of thinking through what your next act would be. Many of the folks within the UX industry and tech industry have been saying amazing things about the Never Search Alone group councils. Phil Terry has an excellent book about those councils. So different end objective, helping groups find a job, but Never Search Alone provided a framework for how do you run these councils in such a way that everyone is getting value from them. So that was another resource. And Diana, I believe you recommended the Happiness Project as we were thinking through how to plan this. Mary, you had a book. It's probably
Yes.
still on your desk that we were also using. What was?
Yeah.
I pull it out all.
It's right there.
It's unapologetically ambitious.
Okay.
And what's really nice about that was we were in this midst of all in search of. I think that's how we also came together. And all these books were answering some questions, but we also wanted to talk about them. We wanted to talk about her experience, how it was similar to mine, but yet different, and what we could take away when you combined all these things. Because in life, there's no one answer. There's not one secret sauce.
Yeah.
And that's what this group helped us unearth, is having a platform to talk about and forming our own secret sauce. You can't copy somebody else's secret sauce. You got to figure out what it is for you.
Yeah. And both of you hit on a couple of the council members aren't here today, but there were. So every week there would be an exercise and an agenda for 20 to 30 minutes. And Diana, you mentioned this, we were very flexible about it. If someone couldn't do the reading or if someone didn't do the exercise, and frankly, if someone just said, this isn't for me, that was okay. It was about using the techniques that we brought to the conversation and using the ones that resonated with you. And the way the structure went, I mentioned first week was getting to know each other, introductions, setting intentions. The second week, we started running some exercises around what drives and motivates us from both a life and career perspective. We prompted attendees to say, when you're thinking about what's driven you throughout your career and life, what are your values and mission behind that? What is driving you? And we got into a conversation about that. We mentioned the end goal was to map out a vision for the next chapter. We didn't even start talking about planning out our long-term vision until the 5th or 6th session, because we all agreed, and let me know if I'm right about this, but my sense was we all agreed before you start ideating on a long-term vision, you need to understand why you are where you are now. So we went through some exercises where we thought through our career trajectory and life trajectory, looked at where we had our strengths, where things weren't really resonating with us, but in essence, putting together a map of our careers, of what worked well and where we'd like to improve. We also, many of us, I did journaling, where one of the exercises was we gave ourselves that 2-week period to be journaling about our days, specifically journaling what about our days energized us, what about our days exhausted us, to start giving us a framework for saying, okay, if we're mapping out the next chapter, what is working now and what was working in the past? And just as importantly, what isn't working for us now that we don't want that to be part of our future? So it wasn't until week 5 that we got to visioning. I'm curious for both of you. I know some of us did the journaling, some of us did the career mapping, but during that period where you were reflecting back or looking at your current perspective, were there any takeaways there?
Yeah, for me, it was a really interesting exercise in that, and it struck me because it's the rule that I always learn when I do prototyping at work. Like, your first idea is not your best idea usually. And if you just do your 3 design ideas, you get to something better at the end. And even though I had already done this task on my own of mapping out what was next, the prompt and the detail that it required you to think through and having these conversations in different perspectives helped me to get to a different output, even for like the same path that I had mapped out previously. And then I was like, oh, I guess I could keep going, but whatever. But continuing on really helped me hone in on what I didn't want going forward in my life and what I wanted, where I wanted to put my energy. So just the fact of keeping going and doing those 3 exercises did exactly what it does when you're prototyping, which is gets you out of your head, gets you to a different place, and gets you to a better result in the end. So for me, it was great. It wasn't it didn't land in a very specific plan just because I've got so many variables moving that I'm still sorting out. But it did give me a lot more clarity on what I wanted to leave behind and what I could take with me and what that could look like. So it was a very useful exercise.
Thanks, Diana. I'm trying to recall, Mary, you were very busy early on in the council. I know that. And you were participating in many of the exercises. I'm wondering, the journaling exercises and thinking through your career up to that point, did you have a chance to reflect on that at that point? And if so, what were your perspectives and impressions?
You hit on a high note. I am always very busy. So I like the accountability that someone was keep asking me, Mary, did you do that yet? Good. And then I did do that because it did have its aha moments. And I didn't do it to the extent that some of the other folks were doing. I had a notebook with my other work in there. And when I had a pause in my day, I would jot down, okay, where am I in my day? And a couple of things came through was I really had never been asked to call out what makes me not happy in my day. And all of a sudden being so busy, whoa, sorry, that's just falling down. Sorry, Kamala. Always you go through your day because we know as women, we have to be everything to everybody. And all of a sudden I was starting to realize within that, I was getting unhappy in certain places. And I was starting to recognize, why was my stress level going up? I was like, 'cause I don't like doing that. I'm not saying no. The group allowed me or gave me the accountability to start looking at that. And what I really realized too is I was missing the things that were making me happy before. So things like sorry, the dog just got upset. I do like to go outside and make sure I get my exercise. And that started waning off. And right now, I'm back to every other day outside of my bike, 20 miles to 25 miles. And people are like, really? You're taking that time out? I was like, yes, because my schedule is such, I go late into the evening. So I need a break during the day, and that's okay to take. So I started seeing and giving myself more permissions, because the old adage, when you write it down, you can see and call yourself out. A perfect example is my husband has colleagues here all week from Australia. Saturday, Sunday, great, I'll make you guys dinner. Nope, during the week, you're on your own. Boundaries. Go get Mexican. And they did. So normally I would be doubling down and doing my day and then that day. It was very helpful. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but this allowed me that accountability to do the exercises and have self-awareness. I really missed that, because when you're working as solo entrepreneurs, which a lot of us women are, you having that connection with other folks, where it's not, you have to do this because you're being held accountable by your boss. It's more as we care about you. There was a caring component with it. It wasn't just accountability in the sense that you got to do it to get paid. It was, we want to see you succeed accountability. So that's why
Thanks, Mary.
Helpful.
I appreciate all of the perspectives that we were talking about. It was an interesting makeup of the group, where half of the council group came from a product UX world, design world, and half did not. And I remember this moment again, where we had gone through the process of mapping out our past and what our current journey was. And then we were getting to the meat of our council, which was to start first individually thinking about what our long-term future vision could be, but then we were going to share it with each other. And I remember the council meeting where we were like, okay, next week we're going to be coming in with our long-term vision of what the next chapter would look like. And if I recall, Diana, you and I were like, yeah, we've done this with clients. And I know Stephanie, who was on, was like, I don't feel comfortable doing this. And there were some reservations. I'm curious, going into the visioning. So for those online, for those of you who come from a product design UX perspective, we were asking the women in the council to do work that's very similar to what you ask product teams to do. Now that you have your insights, you've put together your goals, take the time to map out a 3 to 5 to 10, but it was really 3 to 5 year vision of what this next chapter would be. And you could sketch it, you could write about it, but spend that time to think through that vision. And we asked people not to just design one vision, we asked them to think about a couple. One was, if you were to incrementally improve and continue to strengthen in the act that you're in now, what would that future vision be? And then the second one was, what is your big audacious vision, where if everything was coming together in your life, your passions, your interests, your career capital, where would you take your career? So it was two. I'll ask both of you. So going into it, I know, Diana, you were on board. You've facilitated these sessions. Starting with you, Mary, before you went through the visioning exercise, what did you think? I know Stephanie was like, but where were you at?
It's funny you should ask that question. I had never done those exercises before, but I did them for 8 years working at Lululemon. They were, and I think people get nervous and scared that, oh my gosh, and going through that at Lululemon, it was always a 1 year, a 5 year, and a 10 year. When I was first introduced to it, full disclosure, I was coming off a relationship and I was like, yep, I'm not looking 10 years ahead right now. I'm taking one day at a time. So I basically, but they gave me permission to go 3 months, 9 months, a year. And what it does when these visioning extras, so I had missed that. So going back to why I decided to show up was because I knew I was missing something. I know myself, I will go and I won't stop and take care of myself. And this has always been a successful piece of my journey. And what I like about these exercises is it allows you to see something that in yourself that sometimes the others are seeing, but you're not seeing quite yet. It allows you to put it on paper, live in possibility, and take things to the next level. And with the visioning exercises, it can be verbal and not verbal, it can be on paper, it can be a collage. I know at Lululemon one time I did it as a collage. So I was excited to get back to it. I was surprised at myself because I've done these before, because I know when you do 5-10 years, it forces you to look at, okay, what steps do I need to take so I can get there? I think we forget, and that was one of the reasons why I really liked reading this book, was we walk into life thinking they have something I want. How did they get it? They're just lucky. No, they planned. They mapped it out. They planned. Nobody handed it to them. We all know as women, we have to plan a lot harder. We have to plan 10 times harder. It's your way of holding yourself accountable and making your own plan.
They planned, they mapped it out. And Mary, I remember, and Diana, you've highlighted this, they took action once it's mapped out and took the incremental steps in action as well. Thank you. Diana, you facilitated sessions like this before. What were you expecting? Anything shift for you going through a visioning exercise, or was it just exactly how you planned?
No, because and I went into it like, oh, these things are interesting, but I already did this exercise. So, or at least part of it. The first one, which is if you continue on the path that you're on, I hadn't done anything around the second 2 prompts. So I figured that's where all the meat would come in. But there was also an element of the prompt, I think it was, which went a little deeper than I went anyway the first time I did this, which was, what are the steps you need to take in this time frame to move towards that? And that I had done that a little bit, but not as explicitly. And just walking through that, yeah, I got different outcomes for my first set, again, because I had been given these different perspectives and we're hearing different things. And one of the things Mary talks about is branding and coming up with your brand and really focusing on that and having that tightly thought through and communicated, because that helps you move forward, right? It helps other people understand what you're trying to do and the importance of that. And I had notions of that, especially because one of the things I'd been considering was consultancy. And so really putting myself out there as the product that people might hire was something that had occurred to me, but really did get different results just from having gone through the council than I did the first time. And so that was interesting to me. And then just doing the rest of the exercise was also interesting. So yeah, it was a lot different because of the conversations we had and because of the thinking we did and because of the work we did. Yeah, it was a lot. And the accountability of knowing that every 2 weeks you're going to be in conversation about these things, because it's easy to just sit with stuff for a while, especially I'm in this liminal kind of in between state. I'm not working, so I don't have to daily move this forward if I don't want to, but having the accountability of every 2 weeks, knowing that I'm going to have to think about this and talk about this, kept some momentum going, which I found useful as well.
Yeah. I had shared earlier that in terms of the way we approach the visioning, it was very similar to doing product visioning. The key aspect is I see when individuals are working on one, all of us think ahead, like where would we like to get to? Just like any sort of product visioning or using a design studio method, we all went off individually and mapped out our vision or visions for the future. The magic of the visionary exercises is that's part of it, but the big piece is coming back to a
Mhm.
group of individuals and presenting your vision and getting the other people's response. So if you're running a visioning workshop with your stakeholders in-house, it's the same thing. You get the ideas out there, but the magic comes from people giving feedback and iterating and refining. And so when we all came back and the participants came back, this is where, when I've been sharing the council approach with people, they're like, oh, this is like personal coaching, career coaching, one-on-one coaching. And I go, no, because I'd be curious. I don't want to give away like my perspective, but when you came back, both of you, and shared where you landed, what happened then? You shared with 4 to 5 other women. What happened with your vision? Did it stay quite the same? What was your perspective when it was, so for everyone to know, each attendee in the council had 20 to 30 minutes to present their vision. And then for the rest of the session, the other ladies gave feedback. And I'll start with you, Mary. You came back with a couple, maybe 2 to 3 visions of what your future could be. And you presented, you got feedback. What were your experiences there? And what were your takeaways?
I do compare this to my experience before, and it's much deeper here because when you're presenting to a group that has gotten to know you over the last 8 or so weeks, then we really got into relationship, and there was a lot of honesty and showing up every week and sharing what's happening in our life. I was presenting to a group that could ask me deeper questions and to ask you the question, is this really something you want, Mary? Because I mentioned this before. So it wasn't about feedback as opposed to pulling out that piece within us that is always there, but you have this hesitancy to step into it. And this group started to see that more so than I was starting to see where some of my strengths lie. And so that was the beauty of it, was presenting, but also because the group got to know me over the last weeks, they could ask me deeper questions, follow up, but it wasn't in the sense of just, I'm trying to find the word for it. Obviously it had authenticity, it had realness, it had different perspectives, because when you're just working with a one-on-one coach, that's their perspective. We could go back and forth with each other and reiterate in real time. And that reiterating in real time, which was really helpful to understand what I actually was putting on paper and what I actually wanted. Because I think we all know what we want, and formulating that in that elevator pitch can be hard because you're selling yourself. And women have a tendency to hesitate when they sell themselves. And it's funny, I can go into a room and sell anybody else and talk about a lot of things, but when you have to do it internally, you're like, what's my strengths? What's my weaknesses? And I know them, but like pulling that veneer off and pulling off the paper of pushing us to go further, I thought was the real-time value in that. It wasn't just on paper. And I'll even follow up with it because the group knows me. I had an opportunity come up the other day and I was like, okay, who am I going to call? Stephanie. So I called Stephanie and said, you got 5 minutes? Because I need your thoughts on this, because you know me, you know what my goals are, you know what I'm trying to project towards. And she ironed it out into the 2 lanes that we have been talking about and said, ask yourself this question. Is it going to serve this purpose that you're walking towards? So that's the beauty of it, is it's the next steps. That's part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mary. Diana?
Yeah, it was interesting. I don't know. I did mine, and then we were going to go the first week, but I ended up not sharing mine until after everybody had shared theirs. So I had done it, but then watched everybody talk about theirs. I actually got almost as much out of watching everybody talk about theirs as I did about going through my own, because a lot of the discovery was the same. It was a lot of, well, what do I want to spend my time on that brings me joy? What story am I telling myself about myself that other people are like, hey, that's a story you're telling yourself, like, oh, that. Or what is the real focus of how to move this forward? So I did enjoy that conversation, and you guys were definitely gave me that outside perspective and pointed out a few things that I wouldn't have seen on my own. But I got so much just out of, I could have not gone and still gotten a ton of value, because just hearing you guys talk about your plans and what you got out of the vision exercise really informed me and gave me inspiration. So even if I hadn't done it, it would have been fine, because for me, it was all that work and hearing all the lightning moments that everyone was having.
Absolutely. Diana, to both of your points, the amount we were getting from the conversation was just as valuable for me too, in terms of sharing a life career plan. I also observed patterns in what was happening for all of us. So we mentioned that we didn't just map out one long-term vision, we mapped out a few. Like one was for incrementally how we might improve. Another was if our career was no longer available, where might we pivot? And then the third was, as I mentioned, the big audacious, what would I love to do if money was no object? What was a huge pattern and takeaway for me is that when everyone in the group presented their third big audacious, most of us would be like, oh, I can't do this. This is just pie in the sky. But as each participant presented it, the ladies also came back and said, from an outside objective perspective, why can't you do this? It seems like incrementally there are steps you could take. And it was really fascinating where I started seeing that third audacious vision. When I saw it for all of you, I'm like, this is doable. But when we're thinking about our vision, there's a tendency to downplay or decide that it's just not possible. And that was really enlightening for me, watching all of you present and thinking, oh, this is definitely doable.
Yeah. I think the other real big aha moment for me was, we all know this, nobody gets anywhere in life on their own. That just doesn't happen, whether it's networking, connections. We all hear about the men in the golf course, networking. We can just go on and on about conferences and whatnot. And it reminds me of the great Madeleine Albright quote, there's a special place in hell for women who don't lift up other women. That was her favorite quote that she would say when she entered any women's conference. And so this is what really came forward for me was, and the reason why this group, I think, still wants to stay connected is finding that way to lift each other up, which ironically is the lift up title. And I just, but that
hey, Mary, I got that idea from you. You know that. Back to co-creation. Yes,
Look
absolutely.
at all that branding synergy.
Yeah, right. Nailed it. So I think for me, that is the beauty of this. Why we came together, we want to stay together, is because we're coming to the organic realization that for us to succeed, it is better together than alone. For women to succeed, it's better together than alone. And the way our lives are structured, our family obligations, many of us are in the sandwich generation where we have kids. Now we're looking at our parents and trying to facilitate that. We've had conversations about that. And none of that can be navigated alone. I think that's what this council has provided us, to give us that support, because it's harder, as much as there's a dualism going on with women moving to remote work, because it is easier on family life. You can step away, you can come back, but then you lose something. You gain something, but you lose something. And how do we fill that void?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I feel this has been able to do for me and for the ladies in the group. I don't want to speak for you women, but I feel like that is a key piece of it.
Yeah. It was a huge takeaway. And I shared this with both of you. I haven't shared with the attendees. This is our first time talking about the council's approach, and we've been iterating and refining, using it with others. But part of the goal with these sessions is, to your point, Mary, people shouldn't have to go it alone. So we're going to be running ongoing councils for people, but we also know attendees might just say, hey, I could do this. And you know what? You can form a group of 5 other like-minded women and put together the exercises. So one thing we've talked about is we learned a whole lot coming from our backgrounds from visioning and design thinking and brand management. We've learned a whole lot along the way. So having resources and materials for women, to anyone, to say, hey, here's how you can run a council and establish that network. I think that's where I'd be curious from both of you. That's where the magic came, as you were saying, like having a group to come back to. Like, Mary, you mentioned this. We're going on together. This was planned as an 8-week cohort. And when we finished it, I came back to all of you and said, okay, we're done. Would you like to meet once a quarter or once every 6 months? And you all said, no, how about every other week?
Yeah.
So we've continued on. And the question as we've moved forward, sure, you'd love to have training cohorts, but how can we help other women get the resources and materials to build this themselves? And that's part of the intention. Like, how do we share out this work? You both went, how is this different from one-on-one coaching from your perspective? For those, have both of you done coaching, or what are
Yeah, because I remember the first time that someone said to me, oh, it's coaching. Everybody's doing coaching. And I was like, but it's not coaching. It's actually a framework that you can use on your own, setting aside the community piece. If I wanted to do this practice again, I could go through a bunch of those exercises at the next inflection point and get different outcomes and results. So like, it isn't coaching. It's something it's giving you tools that you can use on your own indefinitely, but it's also creating a community that can help you navigate those waters. And like Mary said, you cannot do these things alone. So you can do it alone, right? Like you can do it, but you will get a lot more value if you can have someone say, this sounds like that pattern I keep seeing in your conversation, or you're saying you can't do this, but I'm not hearing why, right? Can you tell me a little more about that? Like, that accountability and that perspective is invaluable, and having that safe space to discuss that. So it's really not coaching because no one's telling you anything. It's self-guided and it's communal. It's the opposite of coaching, I think.
Yeah, I would, to piggyback on what Diana said, it's not coaching because there's a level of intimacy that we have developed. And with a coach, I don't know, sometimes they're going through their protocol. Like, we have to talk about this, so I'm going to challenge you here, and you're going to go do this exercise. It becomes too rote. It becomes programmatic. And this was much more organic. And there were times where there was agenda, and although we all looked at it prior, prompt each other with what we're going to discuss, sometimes it didn't even correlate with the agenda in any way, shape, or form, because it just took a life of its own. And that was the beauty of it, letting it organically unfold and be what it needed to be in the moment that we were in, whether it's what was happening in the real world, what was happening amongst ourselves. So with coaching, there's the sense of, I'm paying for this. I want A, B, and C out of it now. But with this, when you're in terms of moving forward to the next level with something like this, you're getting the value out of working with other folks who want some of the same goals and hope, and being together in that moment. Yeah, that's the beauty of it.
Mary, it was you who said where it came up organically, back to thinking about product offerings and value add. I remember one of our last officially scheduled meetings, you just brought up organically, when are we all meeting up and going to some location to get to know each other in person?
I was gone when that came up, but I would like to recircle back and say you've not ever answered that question. So.
And we had talked about, and we got a lot about navigating our careers and lives and next chapter. I believe it was Stephanie who was saying, and I think there's something to this, that mid-career or midlife, it can be difficult sometimes to establish like deep, authentic friendships, especially after the pandemic. And another reason where there was value around the design ideation, but there was real value about remote on Zoom, 6 women coming together and becoming friends and in a few months. And the more we can figure out how to take that portion, I think you both spoke to, it was growth for me, where I'm accustomed to having those C-levels or product managers who want to be talking time boxing, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, like 3 minutes to present, 2 minutes to critique. I had to take a breather, and you both said this was the big value, like not time boxing us, being flexible and allowing the friendships and connection and conversation just to happen. And that was growth for me, but it was also enlightening that, yeah, we're using design ideation and visioning, but it was about the people coming together. And that was the biggest value to me.
Yeah.
I think part of that magic too is that the ability to do the exercise or not and fit this into your life, right? Because I think that is one of the challenge that's having women at our stage of life feel so isolated, right? We're mothers, we're working. There's no time for your social life, or there's a small amount of time for your social life, but it's hard. And certainly not the deep connections, right? If I see some of my best friends once every 4 months for coffee, like I'm doing really well, right? This is a very easy to fit in our busy schedule, tiny little nugget of coming together and having deep conversation that you can't get anywhere else. But it was so easy to fit into a busy life, right? Do the exercise and reading or not, right? As you can. And 1 hour every 2 weeks, everyone can do that, right? And so just having that space and being able to dedicate the time, no matter what was going on, I think is part of it too, because it's just so hard to connect and have space and see people routinely. But this was just the right amount of just a little bit of effort, but nothing that was going to add stress to your load.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Diana and Mary, we have 5 minutes left.
Mary, did you have one other thing?
And I'll definitely let you talk. I also wanted to, just before you do, Mary, we have just a couple of attendees on, and I wanted to say no pressure at all, but if you'd like to, I made the capabilities available. If you'd like to join, we have about 5 minutes for conversation and questions, no pressure too, but if you'd like to join, I am recording. So if you're okay putting your video on, feel free to do. If you'd rather not, that's fine as well. But we have 5 minutes for questions. So feel free to join and ask a question or put it in the chat window. But thank you all for coming and listening to us. And Mary, it's all you. Well, sorry I interrupted.
All good, all good. So I think to add what Diane was saying is we're at this stage of our lives, and I bring this back up because we're constantly being the nurturer. I think the reason why to be fully honest and transparent, the reason why I kept showing up was I wanted some nurturing. I wanted to be on the other side of that. And that's what we did for each other organically because we got in the relationship. I want someone to say, you're doing okay. And you've got this, but let's rework this a little bit here or there because we're constantly the ones taking care of everybody else and have to show up. And I know it showed up for me in my career because having been a single mom for a long time, nobody else is going to do the stuff. I've got to get it done. And when you're in work mode too, you do the same thing. I got to get this done. I got to get this done. And so it was a good switch. And when Diane was saying you carve out time, but for me, the little voice in my head was, this was me time. How many times in a week do we get to have some me time and then have some other folks lift you up? I'm like, that's nice. Let's just call it. So
Well,
anyway,
Diana and Mary, thank you for sharing your perspective and thank you for continuing on for the council. As we were talking about, in terms of next steps, our group is going on and we're running councils for other women as well. But what's really spoken to me over the last couple of weeks is the more we get these resources out, like how to run your council, here's some exercises to think about, the more Mary and Diana, you both spoke to, the more we can set people up not to have to go it alone, the better. Thank you for the attendees who came today. In terms of next steps, I'll be sending a follow-up survey and eval to get your feedback on the session. Especially, we'd love to hear why you came, what you're hoping to achieve, what else you'd like to learn, so we can provide those materials to you. So I wanted to thank you all for attending today. I hope it was really helpful. I know the councils have been helpful for us. So thank you, Diana, and thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.